Russian gas accounted for 40% of our imported gas. Today, it's down to 9%. But we also see that Russia keeps actively manipulating our energy market. And as a result, prices have risen by more than 10 times compared to before the pandemic. Millions of Europeans need support. This is why...
That was President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen addressing State of the Union in September 2022. The prompt for the speech and response to Russia's energy exports was a series of awakenings among European countries after Russia invaded Ukraine and cut off gas supplies to Europe. According to the Brookings Institute, before the invasion, more than 40% of Europe's imported natural gas came from Russia, its single largest supplier, delivered via 4 main pipelines. Some European countries rely on Russia for more than 80% of their gas supply. But Germany was by far Russia's largest gas consumer by volume, importing nearly twice the volume of Italy, the next largest consumer. In today's news, we often read that Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered Europe's worst energy crisis since the 1970s. But how big of a crisis is it? And what is at stake?
My name is Dr. Benjamin L. Schmitt. I'm a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. My background is both in physics. I work on astrophysics projects and have done so around the world, both in Chile and Antarctica with both Penn and Harvard over the years. But I think, relevant to this interview, my work at the U.S. Department of State for 4 years as European Energy Security Advisor, and my current role with the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy here at Penn, writing and speaking and teaching and researching both Europe's energy security and East Asian energy security issues is probably the most relevant to the audience.
To help me understand the ongoing energy crisis in Europe is Dr. Benjamin L. Schmitt, who has provided congressional testimony to Senate and House members of the U.S. Helsinki Commission.
Concerning Europe's dependence on Russian energy resources, because Putin's Kremlin has weaponized energy against Europe for years, and because hydrocarbon revenues have played an outsized role in funding Moscow's war-making capability. Given this reality, we need to take a lessons-learned approach to identify energy policies that have been successful to curb the Kremlin's energy influence in the lead-up to the war, and we also need to be clear-eyed about the mistakes that were made so they are not repeated again.
You're listening to The Divide. My name is Iris Xu.
Well, look, I think that we have to step back and look at this historically. This isn't something that snuck up on Europe just at the very start of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. In fact, Russia intentionally fostered relationships with, in particular, Western Europe, and in particular, Germany and Austria and a few other countries, to increase their dependence, their over-dependence on Russian energy products, but in particular natural gas, through the Russian state-owned enterprise Gazprom, to make these countries dependent on Russian energy such that they could do a few things. Number one is, over time, weaponize energy and have gas cutoffs such that they would undermine the ability of, at least in their view, undermine the ability of Western leaders to have foreign policy latitude on a number of issues. We, of course, saw Russia cut off gas to Ukraine many times for politically motivated reasons, starting in the 2000s all the way through, basically the large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We also saw Russia use energy products for spreading malign influence. And what I mean by that is that Russia intentionally built up these relationships such that it could conduct what is known, at least in academic circles, as elite capture. And the idea behind that is that former senior officials that either supported Russian, energy projects and or Russian policies while in office. There is a long track record of them stepping out of office and going to work for Russian state-owned enterprises. And what that started with was back in 2005 and going into 2006, former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, as he was being, voted out of office and leaving office, he approved the Nord Stream 1 pipeline from Russia to Germany, approved it on the German side, stepped out of office, and almost immediately was placed on the board of Nord Stream AG, which is, of course, a Gazprom subsidiary, and over the years became one of Russia's so-called Trojan horses in Europe, basically advocating for pro-Russian policies and things like this, and really undermining democratic resilience in the process. And so we saw this go on many other occasions over the years, including in Austria, where we saw former Austrian Chancellor Christian Kern taking a job for Russian railways after leaving office. We saw former Austrian Foreign Minister Karin Kneißl stepping out of office and taking a job for Russian state-owned oil company Rosneft. We saw former Austrian Econ Minister Hans-Jörg Schelling step out of office and work as a senior advisor for Nord Stream 2 AG, which again was a fully owned subsidiary of Gazprom, Russian state-owned Gazprom. And of course, we saw French former Prime Minister Francois Fillon worked for not one but two Russian state-owned oil and gas trading firms. And the problem, Iris, is that these acts were not illegal, right? I'm not alleging anything illegal, but the problem is it undermines democratic resilience because what happens in the process are the electorates that these folks were serving when they were in the public trust then wonder, were they taking pro-Russian positions in office because they believed that that was best for our country, Germany or Austria or France, or were they really doing it because they thought maybe they could curry favor and get one of these high-paid jobs afterwards? And it's hard to disentangle this, and this is why I have called for across global democracies something called the Stop Helping Adversaries Meddle in Everything Act to get passed. And I testified before U.S. Congress calling for this.
The Stop Helping Adversary Manipulate Everything Act, also known as the SHAME Act, was introduced in October 2022 by the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. The bill received bipartisan backing. It is designed to serve as a deterrent for would-be enablers of foreign governments seeking to undermine democracy, democratic institutions, and U.S. national security interests.
And what it would do is basically make this illegal. If you work for the public trust, if you are a senior official in a Western democracy, you can no longer exit office and work for a state-owned enterprise of an authoritarian nation, period. And so right now there has been a few draft versions of this floating around U.S. Congress. The idea is to set a precedent. It obviously doesn't have any impact on other countries doing this, but if we can set a norms setting process and have this happen, that's all to the better. And it would be great to see the U.S. pass this, European democracies pass this, of course, Taiwan passing this as well would be great. It shouldn't be controversial, right? There's a lot of jobs that you can take after working in government. It does not have to be for the Russian Federation or the People's Republic of China, right? Or North Korea or Iran or any of these rogue authoritarian nations. And I think that that's another reason that energy weaponization is not just about gas cutoffs and physical infrastructure protection, but also about kind of these more insidious strategic corruption issues and elite capture issues.
According to the act governing relations between the people of the Taiwan area and the mainland area, any individual, juristic person, organization, or other institution of the Taiwan area shall not hold any position or become any member of the agency, institutions, or organizations of the mainland area which are political parties, the military, the administration, or of any political nature, and those who violate the law may face a fine of 10 to 50,000 NT dollars, which is around 15,000 US dollars. And if you are a former government employee, you might face a 1-year imprisonment. But according to a 2019 United Daily News report, almost no one was ever punished. But going back to Europe, I asked Dr. Schmitt whether there's any evidence that shows government officials taking pro-Russian positions while they were in office in exchange for financial benefits after they leave office.
Well, on pro-Russia policies, I think it's well documented, right? I mean, you have, Christian Kern writing a letter with then Vice Chancellor of Germany, Sigmar Gabriel. So Christian Kern from Austria, the Chancellor of Austria, co-authoring a letter with Sigmar Gabriel of Germany, the Vice Chancellor, against U.S. sanctions on Russian natural gas, on Russian energy, in particular pushing back on the so-called Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CATSA of 2017. They basically sided with the Russian Federation and pushed back on U.S. sanctions. We saw Karen Kneissel taking pro-Russian positions while in office. My goodness, Iris, she actually invited Vladimir Putin to her wedding, and very publicly, Putin danced with her, right? This is very clear that there was a pro-Russian sentiment in their policies taken before they left. Again, I want to make it clear to the audience, I am not alleging that they did anything illegal. I think it should be made illegal to take these jobs after leaving, because there is, you don't need to have some sort of, bombshell report of a quid pro quo agreement saying, look, I will take a pro-Russian position while in office if you, you in the Kremlin give me a job at Gazprom. No. I don't think that happens. I think the idea is that by taking these positions, they kind of sell the idea to the Russians that they would be a good partner to have on their boards in the future, whether they consciously even think about that or not. Right? It doesn't even have to be planned. And then the concern is, because this hasn't been made illegal, and because in a lot of sectors of Europe, you have populations that will see this as sleazy or problematic, but not legally corrupt.
Sleazy or problematic, but not legally corrupt.
You get to a point in which more and more officials might say, well, I could do that too, right? I could do that too. And again, not illegal, it should be made illegal.
Like Taiwan, many European countries are grappling with domestic pro-authoritarian voices. For these European nations, political challenges are closely linked to their dependence on Russian money and resources. But how dependent are the European countries on Russia's energy imports?
Well, leading up to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, of course, Russia initially invaded Ukraine and illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. But even after that, after 2014, Germany and other countries pursued a pipeline known as Nord Stream 2, which would increase gas dependency to some extent. We looked at this, if you look at the statistics over the years, we're seeing countries 40% dependent or more on Russian energy, and Russian natural gas in particular. The EU was, at times between 30 and 40% dependent. And you might say, well, there's not even a majority of the gas coming from Russia, so how could that be over dependent? Well, if suddenly 40% of your natural gas supply is cut off, that is a massive shock to the system, and it has massive economic issues, strategic security issues, political issues, and it undermines, again, democratic resilience, the trust of citizens in their governments to do the right thing. And so, we saw these gas cutoffs over the years, and then after Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, we saw Russia basically continue this playbook. It cut off gas through the pipelines going through Belarus and Poland into Europe, and also cut off gas in the summer of 2022 through Nord Stream 1, first by 40%, then by 60% later in the summer, and then by September 1st of 2022, it was fully cut off. And this is again why these projects with authoritarian nations are not just commercial deals, because if you have a state-owned enterprise of an authoritarian nation and they are in charge of energy trade with your country, they see this as a strategic issue in addition to an economic issue. I am not alleging that none of the decisions made by state-owned enterprises of authoritarian nations are in their economic interests. They in a lot of cases do want to make money, but they are also able to use these projects to strategic and security effect. And so that's why I often call Gazprom. It's really not a company, as sometimes the press calls it, or a state-owned enterprise. It's really a ministry of gas influence, right? And you see this all around the world with authoritarian nations, whether it be in energy and telecoms, in other industrial sectors where they're really core critical infrastructure and critical materials issues at play, in which they could use this and sell democratic nations on the quote unquote economic benefits. But in reality, they are used in the future, or especially in any contingency, as we saw with Russia after its large-scale invasion of Ukraine, to undermine the national security interests of democratic nations, and in particular, limit their foreign policy latitude to respond, in this case, in Europe's case, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The idea was, of course, from the Russian side, that if we start cutting off all the gas and things like this, it will put so much pressure on Western leaders that they will abandon Ukraine to Russia's illegal onslaught. And that just can't happen. That's why everything we can do as global democracies right now to stick together and make sure that we don't build up these dependencies is so crucial.
Millions of Europeans need support. This is why we are proposing a cap on the revenues of companies that produce electricity at low costs. In these times, it is wrong to receive extraordinary record revenues and profits benefiting from war and on the back of our consumers. And we will amend the temporary state aid framework in October to allow for the provision of state guarantees while preserving a level playing field. These are only the first steps, but because as we deal with the immediate crisis, we must also look forward. And therefore, my diagnosis is the current electricity market design that is based on the principle of merit order is not fit for purpose anymore. It's not just for consumers anymore. So we have to decouple the dominant influence of gas on the price of electricity. And this is why we will do a deep and comprehensive reform of the electricity market.
That was the second half of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's speech at the State of the Union in 2022. Thank you for listening. This episode of The Divide is produced by Radio Taiwan International. We will continue our conversation with Dr. Benjamin L. Schmitt next week.
And many of these have very unsettling parallels to the sort of threat perception and indeed real threats that are going on and continue to be prevalent across East Asia, and in particular in the Taiwan Strait.